All right, so introduction to morality. Where to begin with this topic? Where to begin with this video? Well, I guess we can start with a little bit of house cleaning. I just want to let you know what you're in for because this topic, this video, after writing it out, I realized got very, very long. It's a very long introduction to morality. And so what I'm going to do is probably upload this video in two parts. Part one, which is primarily going to be focused on defining some key terms that we need to understand in order to move forward. And then the second part will be really zeroing in on morality and its relation to the emotional aspect of consciousness. And so I'll probably do part one, part two, and then I'll probably upload the entire thing as well. So you'll probably see 3 videos coming out, but just understand it's all the same information. I just don't want anyone to see an hour-and-a-half long video on the introduction to morality topic and then feel like they're overwhelmed by that long of a video. And likewise, if you prefer long videos, I will make sure that that's up for you as well, because I personally prefer longer formed videos as well. And so let's just get into this. Let's start by how we should always start when we're introducing topics to people, and we start by defining some key terms. And I define them based on how I use these terms so that you can understand what I'm talking about. I don't particularly care how other people use these terms because, well, it's not how I use these terms. And so if I want to come to terms with somebody, I will. But in lieu of being able to communicate with somebody else, because I'm just talking to a camera by myself, we're going to just have to use my definitions of these terms. And so the terms that we have to start by defining are first, consciousness. And I understand that I've defined consciousness in 3 separate videos now, but I still I've never actually made a complete summary of consciousness. I've never actually summarized it very quickly, and so that's what I'm gonna start by doing that. And we have to start with consciousness if we're going to talk about morality, because quoting Sam Harris, consciousness is the basis of human morality. So we have to start with the foundations, and I'm going to summarize it here. Just also just in case you're new to this channel and you haven't seen the other 3 videos that I made on consciousness, and that's okay because I'm going to summarize it here. And then we can move on, and I'm going to define morality again. And I'm just going to confine that term a little bit more, really just make it a bit more of a fleshed out definition of it and what I mean by it. And also, in doing so, there's a couple of terms inside the definition of morality that I feel that I need to define as well. And those are right, wrong, and behavior or action. And I'm only going to briefly go over behavior or action because, it was like 2 videos ago that we talked in detail about what action is or what human behavior is. And so I don't think that we need to go over that much, but with right and wrong, because they're the crux of natural law and they underpin this entire understanding of our reality, I'm going to spend a lot of time defining those 2 little terms so that they're very clear, very concise, and so that you'll be able to understand me as we continue to move forward into this topic. And so, starting with human consciousness. What is human consciousness? Well, consciousness is the state or quality of sentient beings to find or create meaning from the arrangement of information both within oneself and within the realm in which the self exists and operates. And so, in order for a conscious individual to find or create meaning from the data structures within the individual's observable playing field, which is really what consciousness is, this observable playing field, the individual needs to be able to interact with or experience those data structures. And it's consciousness itself that acts as this operating system that allows us to do that. And it allows us to interact with this stuff both within ourselves, with what it perceives to be, or what we perceive to be as within ourselves, like our thoughts, our emotions, and also in the outer world of our actions and our behavior in the real world, in physical reality. And so, ultimately, all that consciousness is experience. It's human consciousness is experience. It's all that a human can experience. And what I do and what I prefer to do is parse topics. And basically parsing topics just means breaking them apart into their constituent parts so that we can study each part and then bring them all back together again so that we can understand the thing as a whole much more effectively. It's like breaking apart an engine to try to understand what or how the engine was made, and then you just put the engine back together again, and that's a way more effective way to understanding a topic than to just look at an engine in its entirety and pretending like you know anything about that thing. And so when we break consciousness into its constituent parts, all that we're doing is trying to figure out the kinds of experiences that a human can experience and separate them out based upon the way that we experience them. And when we do this, we see that there's 3 distinct different types of experiences that a human can experience. Okay? There's very simply, like just think about just think about experiences that a human can have and see if you can separate them out in a particular way. And if you do this, you can see that there's a few different ways a human can experience this reality that we find ourselves in. And one of the ways is simply just by doing an action, like moving my hand, like actually moving or doing something in this world, creating something, being something. And so that's one of the aspects of consciousness. It's doing something. It's an action. Okay, and these actions are very distinct, and we separate them out from these other 2 aspects of consciousness because of the way they act and operate, based upon the way that we experience them. And so, for example, moving my hand, taking a breath, which I needed because I was not breathing there for probably first 8 minutes of this video. Those things that I just did, moving my hand or breathing, those are actions in the real world. You can see my actions, which is interesting. That separates them out from the other 2 aspects of consciousness. And also, they're physical, which separates them from the other 2 aspects of consciousness as well, kind of. And also, that means that they're bound by the laws of physics, which is interesting as well. And so, if we ask ourselves, like, what else can I do? Simply by just asking that question, you realize that there is something that you can do that cannot be really defined as an action, really. Because when I ask you a question, you think about that question, you're thinking. And while technically thinking is a verb, it's an action, there is a little bit of overlap in these 3 aspects. But as you can see, that the experience of thought is fundamentally different from the experience of action, okay? And it's different because the experience of action is done in the physical world, whereas the experience of thought is done in this perceived mental world. And because of that, thought doesn't do what physical actions do, and therefore they're not bound by the laws of physics. And that's interesting as well. And then so finally, the 3rd aspect of consciousness is the kind of like a bridge between these two, like the gulf between thought and action, and that is feeling, the ability to feel, which is an entirely different experience from an action, because you don't really act or do a thing when you're feeling, you feel a feeling. And so like just simply me by moving my arm, I feel the air on my hand, and like I feel the resistance of my flexibility of motion in my elbow. And those are feelings. They're different from an action, and they're different from a thought as well, because when you think about something, a thought doesn't make you feel, it doesn't necessarily make you feel something. Like when you don't feel a thought, basically is what I'm trying to say. You don't feel a thought. A thought can elicit emotions, can elicit feelings, but the thought itself isn't something that you feel. You feel the feelings that the thought creates, that the thought engenders. And so, both the experience of thought and action can cause the reaction of feelings. They can and do, because all 3 of these aspects of consciousness elicit one another. They are all doing, at the end of the day, trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to get you to take action in the real world, trying to get you to do things, okay? And ultimately, they elicit each other, because when you're doing an action and you're not thinking about it, and then by doing that and not thinking for a while, you might stop and go, wait, why am I doing that? That's a thought. It actually causes you to stop and think and reason, and give yourself reasons why you're doing the thing. Likewise, most of the things that we do will elicit emotions within ourselves, will elicit feelings, but feelings can also elicit thoughts. Certain sensations can elicit memories inside of our heads. And it's just interesting how these things all interact with each other, because at their most general levels, these are just three things that conscious human beings can experience: thought, emotion, and action. That's all that they are. That's all that consciousness is. And we need to study these aspects of consciousness separately to just better understand each separate one. But also, at the end of the day, we have to understand human consciousness as one singular thing, and these three things working together, acting as one. Because ultimately, consciousness, thought, emotion, and action of the individual is all about creation, action in the real world, doing things, becoming new things, transforming ourselves, having new experiences, which is all about, which is basically the definition of expanding our consciousness. And so, if you're experiencing more things, if you're doing more things, all that means is that you're creating more things. You're expanding your consciousness. You're having more experiences. You're doing new and more unique things in your life. And this is all that there is to do for humans. And so our entire conscious state is designed to get us to do those things, because when we do these things, really at the end of the day, what all of this stuff does is allow us to have a higher probability for survival in the real world and replication, because that's really what this is all about, okay? So ultimately, we master consciousness by binding the three aspects of consciousness together. So there is a goal here. There is a strategy to this. We want to bind these three aspects of consciousness together such that there is no contradiction between our thoughts, emotions, and actions. As we think, so we feel, so we behave. This is ultimately the ideal state of the human being, okay? So you're not in contradiction with yourself. So you're not acting in contradiction with yourself. So you're thinking something that's making you feel something, and then you're doing something that is not in relation to those thoughts and those feelings. Maybe to try to make somebody feel good or to protect yourself for some reason. That is not a comfortable position, not a comfortable existence to have. It doesn't feel good to be like that, okay? And so ultimately what we're looking for is internal sovereignty. It's bringing yourself, your being, into unity or non-duality, and ultimately allows you to be the master over your own consciousness, master of your own fate. This is true self-discipline, self-control, self-love, and self-mastery. And I studied consciousness because all that stuff, self-discipline, self-mastery, self-love, all of that stuff is all about success, okay? And if we understand consciousness, we can understand how to be successful in whatever we want to be successful in. And that's what I want to teach people, because the more people that are sovereign individuals that can be successful in whatever they want to be successful in, that will ultimately foster freedom for all at the collective. It can't be done unless we're able to master consciousness at the individual level. And that's why I spend so much time talking about consciousness. On top of that, also, I don't focus on a singular niche. I don't talk about how to be successful on social media. I don't talk about how to be successful at starting a Shopify store. I don't talk about how to have a successful family or relationship. I talk about how to be successful in whatever you want to be successful in. And I don't care what that is. Okay? I just want you to be successful and a sovereign individual, someone who can actually do it and command that doing, that action, that being for yourself, because that's how we're going to get ourselves out of the mess that we are currently in. It's all got to start at the individual level, and then it fosters freedom for all at the collective level. And so, one last point, and then we'll get into morality, because we're going to talk about this a lot later on, but we have to remind ourselves that we are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions, and we're not even our actions. All those three things, okay, those three aspects of consciousness, remember, are just experiences. They're experiences, okay? So thoughts and emotions are experiences. They aren't you. And just like, the action or the experience of surfing or going to the gym. Like you wouldn't say, I'm Jim, I'm a Jim. I'm not, you wouldn't say that like my being is a surfer. Those are just experiences that you're doing. And it's the same thing with thought and emotion. We have to separate ourselves from our thoughts and our emotions and our actions as well, in order for us to objectively observe them and study them, and not try to control them or protect them as who we are, because they're not us, okay? And, we're going to talk about this a little later on to a great degree, because I hope that me just saying that, well, you're not your thoughts, emotions, or actions, then, well, what are you? Well, that's a very fun question to answer, and I look forward to answering it later on. I'll save that one because it's a fun one. And so, moving on, because we're done with the summary of consciousness. So, morality. We can talk about that for a little bit now. Well, first, I really do believe that people have a very misunderstood conception as to what morality is. And I think people like to think about it like as if it were like ethics or something, being like a more ethical person, being a more religious person, whatever that means. And I don't really understand. I get kind of an idea as to why that is, but that's not really the point of morality. It's like, yes, it's true, okay? If you become a more moral person, you will become, naturally, a more ethical person. But that's not the reason why we study morality, okay? We learn morality simply because acting morally offers us a higher probability for success and happiness in our lives, and becoming a more ethical person really is just a byproduct of being a more moral person or living a more moral life. And if that sounded weird to you, I really do think it's because because we're using a different definition of what morality is. And because, I understand if you're looking at this from like a anti-religious point of view, and you're hearing somebody say, oh, if you're a more moral person, that person lives a better life. And you're like, well, that's just religion. You're going to try to stuff religion down my throat. And it's like, no, that's not what morality is about, okay? And so we have to start by first defining this term morality and its constituent parts as well, so that you can understand just exactly what I'm talking about. So simply, as I've defined multiple times in the past, as I've alluded to in the past, morality is the knowledge of the objective difference between right action and wrong action. So there's a few terms in that definition that I need to clear up, including morality itself, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on, but I just want to get out of the way the action and the behavior part, because action and behavior are synonyms, they're one and the same, and it just implies existence, okay? Action just implies existence, and it's just a human doing something or being something. So it's like whatever you're doing, your behavior in the real world, everything that another individual can observe, that is action, that's behavior, okay? And we've talked about this existence and action and being and doing a whole lot in like two videos prior to this, so I'm not going to spend that much time on that topic here. I just wanted to point out that I'm just trying to confine morality to what it concerns itself with, okay? And so morality only concerns itself with the actual real-world actions of the individual. And this is because our actions in the real world are the only thing that we are actually in control of. Everything else is guided by circumstance, chance and circumstance, where you're born, where you're brought up, where you're raised, who your parents were, stuff like that, stuff that you have absolutely no control over. History as well. And so, as we dive deeper into the topic of morality, I just want to point out that all wrong behavior, like what is a wrong action, is wrong simply because it is always the initiation of aggression, of violence against another sentient being. And that's important because thoughts and emotions, those two experiences, they can't act on another sentient being. And therefore, morality does not concern itself with your thoughts and emotions. It only concerns itself with your actions, because wrong actions are only the initiation of violence against another sentient being, something that thoughts and emotions cannot do. And the point of me bringing this up is the fact that being moral has nothing to do with eradicating bad thoughts from your mind. It has nothing to do with ending embarrassing emotional impulses or urges that you may have from time to time. It doesn't care about those things, because at the end of the day, you actually don't even have control over those embarrassing urges and impulses, or those bad or negative thoughts that you have, okay? The only thing that you can control are your actions in the real world. The only thing that you can control are the things that you do, your behavior, your actions, okay? So, also I want to point out that, when you do try to quell your ability to think, to imagine new things, to imagine a a new world that is wholly different from your current state of affairs, you need your imagination to be able to run wild in that situation, because you're trying to think about something that is unknown to you, and you need to allow your imagination to do that. You also need to allow your imagination to imagine what it would be like if you committed a wrong, if you murdered somebody, because then you get to experience that idea, that imagery, and the feelings that those images that your imagination created, how those feelings feel. Okay, so we need to allow our thoughts to do this stuff. We need our thoughts to sometimes be wrong, to feel the feelings that they create, that they engender. And then we go, oh, I don't like that feeling. I don't like the feeling of murdering somebody. I don't like that feeling of just imagining it. So just imagine actually doing it, for example. Okay, and so I just point that out again because of this misconception as to what morality is for so many people. Nothing to do with that. It's just your actions, okay? You can still have bad thoughts. Just don't act on them. That's the point of having an imagination. All right, so moving on. Next, let's spend an inordinate amount of time talking about what a right is, talking about what a wrong is at their most general levels. We'll get more specific later on. I just want you to know what I mean. I just want you to know what I mean when I use these terms, okay? So, what is a right? A right is what is correct, okay? That's all that means. A right is correct. What is correct? Well, correct means free from error or in accordance with the truth. This means what is right is correct or is the truth. Excuse me. So, if I say that 2 plus 2 equals 4, that's right. That's correct. This is all that being right means, okay? It means you gave the correct answer. And note here, it also means and is synonymous with being moral and or good. Those are the same words, okay? And so you're moral when you're right, when you're correct. That's all that being moral means, okay? And that's all that being good means, okay? Just think about like the Verizon commercials, the old Verizon commercial with the guy who'd be like, can you hear me now? Good. Can you hear me now? Good. Okay? So he's asking the question and somebody's saying yes. And he's like, that's what he wants. That's the desired result that he wants. So he said, good. That's right. That's moral. That's correct. That's all that this is. Being moral isn't about religion or being humble or pious or anything like that. It's about being right and knowing why you're right. That's what it's about, okay? And so being moral means that you're good, that you're right, that you're correct, that you're true, because your actions don't break the laws of nature and they get you the desired result that you want. I want the desired result of knowing what 2 plus 2 equals. If I say that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and that's correct, then that's right, that's good, that's moral, that's true. Okay, because it got me the desired result, and because it's correct, and I know why, because I know what plus means, and I know what 2 means, and I put those two together, makes 4. So, unfortunately, unlike in mathematics, in life, since we can never be perfectly right or perfectly true in anything really, because of circumstance and execution of your right answer, so you may have the right answer, but you may not be able to execute entirely to a proper ability in order to actually do the right action. It's ultimately about being most right, the most right that you can possibly be, the most correct that you can be in any particular situation. And so, how would I describe an action that is a right so that we know it when we see it, okay? So this is interesting. So we're out of the realm of mathematics. We're talking about actions in the real world. Understand that numbers don't exist in the real world. They're abstract things. And morality really only concerns itself with actions in the real world, which aren't nearly as precise as mathematics. So how would I see a right action? Like, how would I be like, okay, that's a right action and that's a wrong action? How would I separate those out? Well, a right action is any action that is moral, which acts or which makes it acting in harmony. The action is acting in harmony with natural law, because actions based on it do not result in harm to other sentient beings. So again, you can tell what a right action is because all rights do not cause harm to other sentient beings. Now we're going to talk about this in greater detail a little later on, I think a couple of videos from now, because this needs clarification, because it lies, this right and wrong, this doing no harm or doing harm, violating the laws of nature, This lies at the crux of natural law. This is the crux of natural law. This is the heart of natural law. If you can understand this, then there's really not much that you won't be able to understand on your own, okay? So, right, good, moral, correct, true, these all mean the same thing. Being good means correct. Being right. Correct is moral. When someone says that you have a right to do something, what they're saying, or what they should be saying, is that that action is morally good, justified, correct, it's acceptable. And it's acceptable and correct simply because that action, that right action, doesn't cause harm to other sentient beings. That's all this means. And so understand that this is how I define moral. Also understand that people are using this term very improperly right now. So just be aware of that and utilize this knowledge as a way to try to figure out whether somebody is using the term moral properly, particular politicians these days. So, rights are both an action that we can do and, very importantly, a thing that we can own. This is a fundamentally important thing. We're going to talk about property rights a little bit later on because ownership of our rights is fundamentally important to us understanding this topic of morality as a whole and understanding the laws of nature as well, natural law as well. Because it changed everything. This understanding of being able to own a right really changed a whole lot of things in Western civilization, in civilization as a whole as well. But what's important to understand now that we have to understand is that every single person on the face of the earth, every single human being on the face of the earth has the exact same rights as every other individual. Not one person has a single more right than any other person because rights are universal. They come with the human operating system. They come with consciousness. They come with our state of being, all right? We're born with them. Just like we're born with 10 fingers, just like born with 2 eyes and a heart. There's certain things that come with being a human, and our rights are one of them, okay? And so, it's from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our rights don't come from the government. That's the point I'm trying to make. The government simply exists to secure and protect the rights of its people from being infringed upon. And again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not the only rights that we have. They're just the fundamental rights of they're fundamentally important rights that kind of engender all other rights that we also have. So it's not an exhaustive list. I'm just pointing that out. So be right, be correct, do not cause harm to other sentient beings, and this is what makes you moral. This is all that moral means. Don't harm other people. So, unless your rights are being infringed upon. So, in order to be moral, you have to be right. You have to exist as being right. This means that you have to know and understand things in order to be moral. In order to be a moral person, you have to know and understand things. Because if you don't know what 2 + 2 is, then, it's going to be hard to have the correct answer for that, to be moral based upon your knowledge of mathematics, okay? So ultimately, knowledge is always the answer. Understand that. There's no getting around this. You have to know things in order to be a moral individual. More knowledge is always the answer. It's always going to help you. If you want to be right, if you want to be correct, more knowledge is what's going to get you there, okay? Not less knowledge. So, moving on to the next definition that we're going to spend an inordinate amount of time talking about, and that would be wrong. So if a right is correct, moral, and good, and true, well, what do you think a wrong is? Well, a wrong is incorrect and not based in truth. So incorrect, you have that in as a prefix. That prefix just means not, and then correct. So incorrect means not correct. So it's faulty or not in accordance with truth. This is what is wrong, false, immoral, and yes, even evil as well. So if I say that 2 + 2 = 5, that's wrong, that's incorrect, that's false, and immoral. This is actually what it means to sin. to give a wrong answer, to be wrong in something. Okay? And that's all that this means. That's all that sinning means. Okay? Sinning just means that you committed a wrong. You did something improperly, incorrectly. Further, a wrong is immoral and in opposition to natural law because actions based in it result in harm to other sentient beings, okay? And, you're looking at 2 + 2 = 5. Like, what's the big deal about getting that wrong? Well, a simple error in this space shuttle, this orbiter, this Mars orbiter in like the 1990s, it was a simple error in changing metric units to imperial units. Just a little tiny wrong. What's the big deal about a little wrong? Well, it destroyed the spaceship and cost U.S. taxpayers $125 million, and all of that research that we could have had was gone. It was blown out the window because of one wrong action. So being wrong, it caused harm to every individual who paid taxes into NASA, okay? And so you can look at this in terms of schooling, failing a test, being wrong on a test. That causes harm to your being. That causes harm to your potential opportunities later on in life. It causes harm to your school because public schools are funded based upon their success in a lot of ways. And so you're hurting your school. You're certainly hurting your family. You're hurting your parents, your mom and dad. They're going to be looking at that and that's going to hurt them. They're mad at you when you fail a test when you're young because it hurts them. All right? It physically, mentally hurts them. It drains them. They want to understand why you're not doing well. It scares them, all right? And so ultimately, you cause so much suffering by being wrong. And that's the whole point of understanding morality and being a moral individual, is understanding the fact that your wrong actions are hurting not just you, but everyone around you, okay? And so when you're wrong, what you do is you prove to the world that you don't know or understand things. You're ignorant to how the world works, and that actually makes you into a very dangerous individual, okay? Because if you don't know something and you somehow find yourself in a position of some sort of control or some sort of power, and you don't know things, well, your lack of knowledge is going to cause a lot of damage to a lot of different individuals, okay? So just be aware of that. But let's take a step back here because it makes me sound like when I talk about this stuff, everyone gets this idea that I want everyone to be perfectly right all the time and never make mistakes. That is not what I'm saying, all right? And I understand that that's what it sounds like I'm saying, but that's not what I'm saying because we cannot fear being wrong. Remember, we can't fear chaos, okay? We're human. We're supposed to make mistakes. We're supposed to make errors and be wrong from time to time, okay? In fact, we're going to talk about this a little later on because being wrong is part of the learning process. Being wrong is how we learn what the right thing to do is. We have to go into the chaos of the unknown, remember? And when we do that, we will inevitably commit error after error after error in the process of transforming the chaos of the unknown into the known, because that's the process by which that's done, okay? So committing wrongs is how we learn and the right thing to do and what the right thing to do is, and this is largely all that the idea of original sin in Judeo-Christianity is trying to express, okay? We, as humans, are all sinners, all right? It doesn't matter how moral you think you are or how correct or how right you think you are. You make errors, okay? That's part of being human. You're a sinner, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, all right? That's actually a good thing. It's a freeing thing. It allows us to feel okay with the fact that sometimes we commit these wrongs that hurt other people in the process. We just have to understand what to do when we commit a wrong, okay? Because it's called apologizing, and we're going to talk about that in a much greater detail later on, because there's a lot more going on with apologizing than just saying you're sorry, okay? And so, we have to be wrong from time to time in order to find out what's right, and that's okay. We're all sinners. That's all that means, all right? We can do good, and we can do wrong, and we have to do each one from time to time. All right, so in summary, a right is an action that does not cause harm to other sentient beings. A wrong is an action that does cause harm to other sentient beings. To be right is to be moral, correct, and good. To be wrong is to be immoral, incorrect, and evil. The more you act in accordance with natural law, the more right you are, the more correct you are, the more moral and good you are. The more that you act against natural law, the more wrong you are, the more incorrect you are, the more immoral and evil you are. So correct yourself. So We'll talk about this stuff more deeply, about what it means to do no harm and acting in accordance with natural law in a couple of videos where I'm actually going to show you the boundary conditions by which what a wrong action is, because there's only 6 wrongs that we should not do. We can do all 6 of them, but we shouldn't do them because those wrong actions cause harm to other sentient beings. And so we'll be drawing a boundary line around them so that you know what these wrongs are, so that you can avoid them to the best of your ability and test this out. See how much more successful you are when you avoid those 6 wrongs at all costs. And so we'll talk about that later on. And so we defined consciousness, we defined morality, I defined the terms within morality, and now I feel comfortable enough moving on into this introduction to morality topic. So we can take a deeper look into this topic, and that's what we're going to do. And this is probably where I'm going to break the videos up if you want to see the part 1 and the part 2. Okay, so